The question asks whether education provides Canada with a democratic advantage when it comes to resisting disinformation and misinformation compared to the United States. This matters because modern disinformation campaigns do not target institutions directly. They target citizens' ability to evaluate claims, assess evidence, and distinguish fact from manipulation. Education shapes those abilities at scale, making it a structural factor in democratic resilience rather than a cultural preference. Yes, to a meaningful but limited extent. Canada's higher educational attainment, stronger literacy and numeracy outcomes, and more consistent civic education provide a real and measurable advantage that reduces population-level vulnerability to misinformation compared with the United States. This advantage is structural and observable, but it is not absolute. It can be weakened by political polarization, emotionally charged narratives, and algorithm-driven media environments that amplify outrage rather than evidence. Canada has one of the highest post-secondary attainment rates in the OECD, clearly exceeding that of the United States. Higher levels of education are strongly associated with improved critical reading, quantitative reasoning, and source evaluation skills. At the population level, this raises baseline capacity to question claims, recognize weak evidence, and detect logical fallacies. This does not eliminate misinformation, but it increases the effort required for false or misleading claims to gain traction. International assessments consistently show Canadian students outperforming their U.S. counterparts in reading comprehension and scientific literacy. Adult skills surveys reinforce this pattern, showing stronger literacy and numeracy outcomes in Canada. These competencies directly reduce vulnerability to common misinformation techniques such as cherry-picked statistics, misleading graphs, false causal claims, and appeals to pseudo-expertise. When basic analytical skills are stronger, low-quality misinformation spreads more slowly and less widely. Canadian education systems place relatively greater emphasis on civics, democratic institutions, and public policy literacy. As a result, Canadians on average display higher trust in public institutions and professional journalism than Americans. This does not prevent misinformation, but it reduces the appeal of narratives that depend on portraying all institutions as illegitimate, corrupt, or conspiratorial. Where institutional literacy is stronger, blanket rejection of evidence becomes harder to sustain. Comparative research shows lower belief rates in demonstrably false claims in Canada than in the United States on issues such as election fraud, climate denial, and public health conspiracies. This gap reflects differences in education, media environments, and levels of political polarization rather than cultural superiority. Importantly, research also shows that as polarization increases, the protective effect of education weakens, even in highly educated populations. Education is most effective against low-quality misinformation rooted in poor reasoning or factual errors. It is least effective against emotionally charged, identity-based disinformation designed to provoke anger, fear, or grievance. Even highly educated individuals remain vulnerable when false narratives align with ideology or personal identity, especially in algorithmically amplified environments that reward outrage over accuracy. Canada's higher levels of education function as a real but incomplete democratic shield against disinformation and misinformation compared with the United States. They raise baseline resilience, slow the spread of low-quality misinformation, and increase the effort required for successful disinformation campaigns. However, education alone cannot counter polarization, algorithmic amplification, or deliberate political deception. It is a necessary foundation for democratic resilience, but it is not sufficient on its own. OECD Education at a Glance provides comparative data on educational attainment, literacy, and system performance across advanced economies, establishing the structural education gap between Canada and the United States. OECD PISA results document differences in student reading, science, and analytical performance that underpin population-level resilience to misinformation. The OECD survey of adult skills measures real-world literacy and numeracy outcomes among adults, reinforcing the persistence of these differences beyond formal schooling. Peer-reviewed research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences examines susceptibility to online misinformation and identifies education as a consistent protective factor, while also documenting its limits in polarized environments. For more fact-based content about Canadian politics, democratic health, economic trends, and rhetorical analysis, the Facts for Canadians platforms offer ongoing resources and educational material. These outlets aim to strengthen public understanding, improve media literacy, and support evidence-based democratic engagement.